So guys, so we're here today with my good friend Harry, and a phenomenal person. And I'm very excited to bring him here on to the show today and to share his experience and to give all future entrepreneurs here in India and the US a lot of hope and I guess advice on how to scale a startup and how to grow a startup and all that. Harry right now is the HR Bigbasket, which I guess you could call the biggest online grocer in India. But he has a phenomenal journey of how he got there. And I'm very excited to have him here to share his experience. Harry, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you, Ephraim, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Harry, let's just jump right into it. And let's just start from the beginning. Where you from? What your upbringing was like? Where'd you go to school and all that?
So Ephraim, I was born in Bangalore. So Bangalore is where I currently live. And Bangalore is a fairly popular place today. And in some ways, it's referred to as the Silicon Valley of India. So I didn't grow up in Bangalore, though. I grew up in a small town in the eastern part of India where my father worked for a government organization. So I grew up in a typical Indian middle-class family. So what really defines a typical Indian middle-class family? So I think a middle-class family is pretty conservative, risk-averse, pays a lot of emphasis on education, would like the children to take up a stable job, would even pledge their home or any other asset to give their children a good education. Never plan for retirement because they plan to stay with their kids when their kids grow up, and that's retirement for them. So that's how a typical Indian middle class family is. So with my parents' aspiration, I studied engineering at a place called IIT Madras, which is the Indian Institute of Technology Madras. Did my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and after finishing that, I did my master's in business administration MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. So both these were fairly reputed institutes. And after my MBA, I joined a steel company called Tata Steel. That was from campus. So that was my first job. So largely, I did my MBA not to really, move out of engineering or find an escape route out of engineering, but really I was passionate about engineering and hence wanted to, enlarge my scope and perspective to an MBA. And that's the reason why I did an MBA. But I just wanted to really start my career with some hardcore engineering on the shop floor, and Tata Steel was the perfect place for that.
Wow, that's incredible. So before we jump into Tata Steel and everything like that, I just want to touch on one point you mentioned, which I've actually heard already from quite a few entrepreneurs in India, is that the Indian culture, what I guess the children are brought up with, and as teens and adults, is that they put a major emphasis on education. And the culture is very risk adverse, in the sense that taking risk is not something that is looked upon with a lot of good, I guess. It's something that's frowned upon more. And to see the whole transformation now with more startups starting and more people that are taking that leap of faith and jumping and starting a startup and taking that risk is just a phenomenal thing to see. And I'd like to ask you also, why is that? Why is there such a big emphasis more on education than letting people take that leap of faith and start a startup, letting people take that risk, and learn? Because in essence, the best education you can have is through learning on the job, is through taking that risk and learning, and obviously learning from other people's mistakes, what not to do, and all that. So why is the culture like that?
So, Ephraim, to understand anything related to culture, you just need to go back a little in history. So if you go back 1,000 years, so Indian society traditionally had been organized in a way in which those who peddled knowledge of any kind were at the highest end of the society, highest strata of society. They were the most respected, irrespective of whether that knowledge was of any practical use to society or not. They were highly respected. Whereas those who were entrepreneurs, those who ran businesses were pretty much at the lower end of the pyramid. And the lowest end of the pyramid were those who, did things with their hands, those who were skilled, the artisans. So in some ways, historically in India, education has been highly respected, irrespective of whether education results in material progress or not. And that continued post-independence as well. So India took a socialist path where the government very clearly took on the ownership for running businesses, as a result of which over a period of time private enterprise almost died. And the relationship between business, those doing business, and those who were regulating business became very adversarial. And those who took on government jobs, worked in public sector undertakings as engineers, those who were doctors, lawyers, they were highly respected, whereas those who were entrepreneurs were thought of as some people, individuals who never got a good job. So I think culture thing, really, to understand, you need to go back to history. And historically in India, entrepreneurs were never deeply respected, although everyone knew that they were needed, but they were not really respected. So societies are built in some ways. So for example, America is a society of businessmen, and India is a society of those who peddle education. That's had been the traditional way it has been. But I think the last 20 years, things have changed dramatically, and that's a very long discussion. And especially in the last 10 years, I think in many ways, taking risk, being an entrepreneur, starting up something has actually become mainstream. If you go to any campus in India, you would find day one slots are pretty much reserved for startups. A startup could, get the same day as a McKinsey would get, for instance. That is big movement. So in every campus, in every, blue chip institution, you find entrepreneurship cells, you find incubation cells, you find accelerators. So all of this, I think, is now becoming a big movement, gathering a lot of momentum. So I think this is a good sign. And as you said, real education happens on the job. When you take risks, make mistakes, get things done, that's fun. That's real education. So I think we're all in the right direction now.
Right. So what caused that transformation for people to start, going towards entrepreneurial route?
Great question. I think if you ask me, so any big change normally, is forced because of some circumstances.
Correct.
So, India had created a web of bureaucracy, and to kill this web, you needed an act of God. And that act of God came in 1991 when India, faced a massive financial crisis. It had run out of, gold, dollars, and we had to really plead for, funds from other countries. So that was the time when India pledged its gold with the Bank of England and realized that the only way forward is to liberalize the economy and allow the entrepreneurs a free wing. So 1991, the crisis was, the reason for all this change. So liberalization happened, and we could find a bunch of entrepreneurs, first generation entrepreneurs, people who had no history in entrepreneurship, actually created this entire, industry of services, outsourced services. You have, companies like Infosys, Wipro, Cognizant, TCS. They're all, multi-billion-dollar companies now, as good as any other company. For example, TCS market cap is, close to IBM's market cap.
Wow.
So in terms of absolute, scale, so these outsourced services created massive organizations. But I would say, having said that, entrepreneurship still had not become mainstream, because not everyone was taking up entrepreneurship, and these entrepreneurs were not solving Indian problems. So they were solving problems for the West. They were using the low-cost labor in India. So labor arbitrage was being used to solve Western problems. So I think in the last 10 years, that's when Indian entrepreneurs took pride in solving Indian problems. So exactly, 10 years back, there were two intrepid entrepreneurs, Sachin Bansal and Binny Bansal. They set up this company called Flipkart, which is exact copy of Amazon. One may call it a copy, but having said that, I think they had the guts to break away from Amazon and created this company. This company, found great momentum, and this has now been acquired by Walmart, a 77% stake for, close to $16 billion, the biggest e-commerce deal in the world. At about the same time, there was another intrepid entrepreneur by name Shraddha Sharma. She ran a startup called Your Story. At that point of time, she quit a cushy job at, TV, a media company, to start this company that tells the story of entrepreneurs, struggling entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs. So she went out and told the story of all these entrepreneurs and popularized, brought entrepreneurship, made it folklore, brought it to the common man. So I think that's how a few events came together, momentum picked up, and then you see what it is today. For example, post success of Alibaba and other Chinese internet companies, Western companies like Uber, for example, or many others, figured out that India is the next big place. And many of them had failed in China because of Chinese protectionism. And they realized that at a macro level, India is the next big economy. So they came in, they really came to India. They had the huge fear of missing out, and they pumped in a lot of money. So you had SoftBank coming in, you had Tiger Global, which invested big time in India and nurtured the e-commerce setup in India. So it was time where everyone in India wanted to be an entrepreneur the last 10 years. Today, you have to be here to believe it. It's as vibrant as the valley. Bangalore is as vibrant as the valley.
Wow, you make just to see how passionate you're about it is just amazing to see. And actually you jumped ahead. It's actually one of the things you mentioned was actually one of my questions I wanted to ask you and bring up. That thing is that another amazing thing to see, not just the fact that everyone is that there's a whole startup culture and people are doing starting startups, is that the whole thing transferred in a sense that beforehand, like you mentioned, like all the companies were becoming outsourced companies for the West. So you had Zoho and a bunch of other companies, but now you have Indians creating companies for the problems in India. So you had Flipkart, you had BigBasket, you had Ola, you had Taxi for Sure, and so many others that are creating companies, startups in India for India, which is happening. And like you said, also, I'm preaching to everyone. I'm saying, if you're looking to invest money, if you're a venture capitalist, if you're, want to seed money or anything, go to India. India is the next big opportunity. India is 10 years behind US, and they're going to build the next few billion dollar companies, unicorns, are definitely going to come out of India. Not even a question. They're going to start in India for India and then move to the US. But yeah, so let's continue on. So you worked at Tata Steel, and after Tata Steel, what happened?
So at Tata Steel, at some point of time, we were facing a crisis. That's because post-liberalization, there were some countries that were dumping steel at prices that were below our cost. So we had an existential crisis, and we got McKinsey to help us restructure, right size, and figure out what we needed to do. And I was part of the core team that worked with McKinsey. And most of the initiative or the project that we drove was around human resources. And I found that pretty interesting. And at some point of time, I decided to move on because I found Tata a bit bureaucratic for me. I was a bit of a rule breaker and quite entrepreneurial, even within the organization. The organization was too large for me, too bureaucratic. So I figured out that I needed to be at a place where I can get things done fast. So I moved to a place called Daksh. That was an accidental meeting with the founder of Daksh, which was Sanjeev Agarwal. So for me, moving from Tata Steel to Daksh was like moving from an oil tanker to a fighter jet. That was the kind of change that I saw. And ever since, I've not looked back. I really thought I found my sweet spot. That's what I'd always been waiting for. The last 16 years has been with a string of startups. I've been with a startup till a successful exit. And that's been my principle, which is once I join a startup, stay on till a successful exit is found. And this BigBasket is at this point of time, my fifth startup in a row.
Oh, wow. So you're like I guess the old sage, the wisdom, the guy with all the wisdom, a bunch of little 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds starting a startup. And here comes the sage coming to make us mature, make the startup.
I wasn't the sage when I joined Daksh, Ephraim. I was pretty young when I joined. That was 16 years back. But I think now with the 25-year-old entrepreneurs, I certainly would a sage.
Yeah, so let's go to, I guess let's start all the way. Let's start with Taxi for Sure, because that was the first, is that like your first early stage startup that you joined that was still a young company, and you obviously stuck with it all the way to the end. So I guess let's start from there. So you wrote that. So let's start off. You're 48 years old at that point in time, and what made you? And obviously, startups back then. You've done a few startups already, and you're excited to go into the next one. But what made you leave, or I guess what made you take that risk to join something that you had no clue how's it going to turn out?
Right. So every startup for me has been the same, Ephraim, which is that I never knew how it's going to turn out. Mm-hmm. But I think Taxi for Sure was the big leap. And the reason is simple. I was, as you said, about 48 years old at that point of time, and the founder was maybe 32 years old. So deciding to work for a founder who was much younger, I think that was a big decision. I'd never done that before. So that was a leap of faith I was making. So a couple of reasons. One is I was referred to Taxi for Sure by Sanjeev Agarwal, the founder of Daksh, who is also an investor at Taxi for Sure, and I respected him a great deal and trusted his judgment. And my first meeting with the founder of Taxi for Sure, Raghu, was also an amazing meeting. I think the first question he made to ask me, rather told me, was that I'm not competent to interview you. So I think we'll be very happy to have you. Could you join us? So I like the humility with which he spoke to me, and his instinct, and the way he trusted his instinct. So I think I felt that I should trust my instinct too, and that's how I made that leap. And it was the best 12 to 13 months in my entire life, professional life. I just loved it. The excitement, the speed, the pace of decision making, everything was just adrenaline all through the 13 months.
Wow. It's actually, we actually had Raghu on a few episodes back. We actually had Raghu, we interviewed him, and he spoke about the journey of Taxi for Sure. And it's he's a phenomenal guy, and amazing story. You also have an incredible post that I wrote, I read about how you talk about what's it like to work for a boss that's younger than you.
Yes.
And a lot of humility that comes together with it, and how to trust it. And it's a phenomenal post, and for anyone that wants to read it. So you at Taxi for Sure, a young startup. You're assuming the HR, and this is a young startup that does not have a defined culture yet. Eventually, they had an amazing culture. So how did you go about building the culture?
A great question. So, Ephraim, culture, if you ask me, in a startup equals founders, period. There's nothing else to culture. So over a period of time, the firms or startups culture begins to take the hues and colors of the founder's own beliefs and culture. And the question is really, how do you institutionalize what a founder believes? What a founder believes, you cannot change. So therefore, the fact that the startup will reflect the culture and beliefs of the founder is something you cannot change. So that will be the culture of the startup. The question is, how does this founder then institutionalize what he or she believes? So the only way I think you can institutionalize culture is to live that every day, is to reward people who live the culture every day, is to penalize people who are deviants, who deviate from the culture every day. So I think that's the only way to institutionalize it. People are watching what you're doing. People are watching what the top 10 people in the startup are doing. Over a period of time, they begin to imitate. Over a period of time, they begin to realize that doing those things that matter, those things that are appreciated, is the right way forward. And that becomes the culture of the startup. Also, it happens through hiring. Ultimately, culture is about people. And so at the end of it, the founders will, during this process of selection, will in some ways select people who reflect that culture as well. So the critical hires also then are people who are aligned with that culture. I would say the only way to institutionalize culture is to live that every day. If the top 10 to 20 people of the company, depending upon the size of the company, live that culture every day, that's when the culture gets institutionalized. And it's really about living the culture and not talking about the culture. It's about walking the talk. So for example, it's very easy to say, we are a company that has zero tolerance for harassment. Very easy to publish that and put it up on the wall. But when your top ranking salesperson commits, and there's a situation where he or she is accused of harassment, and you need to take the call and put your business at risk, that's when the culture really gets tested. So I think it's these difficult situations where people are watching you, how you respond to these situations. At that point of time, if someone has violated this basic principle, has harassed a woman or harassed an employee, is not fired, that's when people realize that what you're saying is not true at all. They will understand that the culture of this firm is performance, delivering business results, and not providing a harassment-free workplace. So people don't believe what you say, they believe what you do. So it's important to really do those things every day. If anyone tells you that culture can be built in any other way, they are lying.
Right. So I totally agree 100%, and I totally identify. And one thing that people always ask is that, when does culture start? So, and I always say, and I always tell them, that culture starts from day one. The first
Correct.
day you open your business, that's the day you have culture. That's the day you have to start building a culture. And like you mentioned, that it comes from the founders. The founders have to be that leading example, you know? Right. They have to show them how to live on a daily basis, how to practice the culture. But the question is obviously, obviously you're living examples so your employees can see how the culture, you know, how to live the culture. But how do you implement that down the whole chain of people? How do you take culture and make sure everyone's following along? So you mentioned, you know, obviously not necessarily to penalize, but to, you know, if people are not following along with the culture, then, you know, they have to go. But how do we make sure that everyone stays in sync the entire time of building out this culture?
Great question, Ephraim. So I would say that there are two components to culture. One is the core components, and one, I would say, those which for which the organization has an aspiration. So let me just give you an example here. So from a big basket perspective, for example, freedom and accountability is an aspiration for us. Speed in everything that we do is an aspiration for us. But what is non-negotiable is providing a harassment-free workplace. That is absolutely non-negotiable. A frugal work, for example, a frugal, you know, approach to doing things is non-negotiable for us. So these are a couple of things that we drive very hard. So just take the example of providing a harassment-free workplace. We are about 15 to 16,000 people spread over the entire country. We have hundreds of women working with us in our warehouses, fulfillment centers, you know, working with the delivery staff, and they are all working in remote corners of the country. So we need to ensure that a woman who joins us at the bottom of the pyramid in a small town is provided a harassment-free workplace. So this is where, you know, execution comes in, which is commitment to the principle of providing a harassment-free workplace has to be, you know, promised through a set of mechanisms that will ensure that the day she joins BigBasket, the head of the, you know, section, head of the business in that location will meet up with her, will read her rights to her, will tell her that he is or she is accessible to her and she can come up anytime. Members of the complaints committee will meet her. Their phone numbers and email IDs will be displayed in public in the regional language as well as in English. And she is free. The HR head in the region will meet up with her. And you know, if there is a complaint, there is a mechanism for swift investigation and quick justice. And irrespective of the stature of the accused, we get justice done very quickly. And that is, you know, a commitment that everyone in the company completely understands. So this is something that we've driven very hard. Now, coming to the good thing to have, which is speed in everything that we do, is something we really aspire for. It's not something, you know, that we say that if you can't do things very quickly, you are out of this job. We encourage people to, you know, respond quickly. We encourage people to take decisions quickly. That's a culture that we aspire for. But something that's non-negotiable is, you know, harassment-free workplace. You know, being cost-conscious, that's not negotiable. Those are some of the things that we go hard on. So I think to build a culture, you need to figure out what are some of the core components, and those you need to really drive hard. And you will be able to drive it hard provided the 10 people in the company, the 10 key people in the company genuinely are aligned with that. If alignment is not there, then those, you know, those statements would just become, you know, pictures on the wall that you put up for which there is no commitment. They just become espoused values which don't really mean anything.
Right. Wow. I'm just blown away. But, you know, you touched on a few topics that I'm definitely we have to go right into them. But like, I'm going to say one thing, you know, as working people, you know, we spend most of our waking hours working, you know. We spend most of our hours working with other people in our company, you know. So we obviously want to work in a place that has the same values that we have and has a phenomenal culture. Because this is where you're going to work for, you know, let's say 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week, or 60 hours a week. And this is the people that you're going to spend most of your time with too. And the amount of people that I find that are just so unhappy in their workplace, or the amount of companies that don't have a proper culture in place, or people that their values are not aligned, it just blows me away in the sense that there's not a big enough emphasis and focus on culture, not a big enough emphasis on making sure that before you get hired, to start evaluate your values, your personal values and your company values, evaluate the culture, and see if you guys can mesh together properly, because this is where you're going to be spending the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I have been speaking to a lot of HR people, and one of the biggest reasons for turnover is because of lack of personality fit. Besides other reasons, but the lack of personality fit is the biggest thing. And I think people need to really start getting into the facts from the employer side and from the employee side to make sure their values and culture are aligned. But we'll go back. So let's get back. Now, you mentioned one thing over there. You said transparency, right? You mentioned that anybody has all the numbers, all the information is posted to contact, and I guess it's in HR or if anything happens. But how important is transparency in a startup?
I would say, one of the foundational traits I would look for in an entrepreneur or a founder, if I had to make an investment. I'm part of a VC firm called Fundamentum as well, a growth stage VC firm. Foundational traits that I would look for are integrity and transparency. So these are the two foundational traits, on top of which, of course, look for clear thinking and a very strong bias for execution. So I really believe that transparency is very critical for a startup within, the employee base, as well as between the founders and investors, between the founders and board members. I think transparency creates trust. Trust is what lubricates the entire, business. Without trust, everything would take a lot of time. There will always be suspicion. You'll always be wondering whether I'm being told the truth or not, whether I'm being given the complete truth or not. So I think transparency is absolutely critical. I think it's a priceless and intangible asset that every founder needs to build with the board, with investors, and with employees.
Wow. So you mentioned Fundamentum, but before we get into that, and before we get into what do you look for in an entrepreneur, let's get to what is your pre-startup checklist for a founder or for a startup to, so a guy comes, before you start evaluating the founders, before someone comes to you for, investment, what is the pre-startup checklist that you always have? You tell someone to go through, someone to, I guess, to take an idea, even to see if the idea could be done, just to verify the idea, anything like that. What is that pre-startup checklist?
So really, there are two types of, situations I would encounter. The first situation is looking at a growth stage startup. So where the idea has been pretty much validated, the product market fit has been established. That's one category of startup, and that's where Fundamentum makes its investments. So there I really would look for, in terms of the founders, their ability to scale, their commitment to building an institution, their clarity of thought, their execution bias. Those are some, their ability to hire people who are smarter than them and build very strong teams. So those are some of the things that I would look for when I look at growth stage startups. And also maybe the size of the opportunity, the size of the market, their ability to defend their position, the kind of moats that they have been able to build, which create those entry barriers for others. So those are some of the things that I would look for. And the second kind of situation that I encounter are early stage startups. So those are places that we don't make investments as Fundamentum, but nevertheless, in my personal capacity, I do some bit of angel investing, and I do interact and mentor some of those startups as well. With those kind of individuals, I really play the role of a sounding board. My questions are really common sense based, which is I don't necessarily understand some of the technical stuff that they're doing, and I don't get some of those. But by asking very elementary questions, you are able to figure out a few things, whether this entrepreneur actually knows what he or she is doing. Does this person know whether he or she is solving a real problem, or is this person so taken in by the coolness of the technology that they've forgotten whether the customer would be willing to pay for it or not? I would try to figure out, why would a customer pay for your service? How did the service get delivered to a customer before? Who provided that service? Why would they now pay you for doing this? And how does it make life different for your target customer? What would change for this customer? Is it really something that will change? For example, you can have an artificial intelligence startup. You can have a startup that is, looking at a CRM product for hospitals. So the question would be, how did hospitals do without a CRM before? What were some of the pain points that they had? Did you talk to some of the hospitals, and what is the feedback? So did you talk to some users? What did they tell you? So artificial intelligence, for example, is supposed to be a very cool thing, and I think it's in a bit of a hype zone. So I would bring this person down to the ground and ask this person, tell me some real problems that your AI would solve, and then go deep to figure out whether these problems really exist and are they really solving a problem. So those are some of the things that I would look for, basic, business common sense, I would say.
Yeah. Like it mentioned, you already answered the question. I was going to ask you another question, like, how important is product market fit, which you pretty much answered also. But like, I was going to ask you, what do you look for more? Do you look for more like a product, or you look for look at the founders? Because most startups, when from start to finish, you usually have pivoted, 2 to 3 or 4 times, depending on the startup, or even 1 time, So the question is obviously how important is the founding team members, which you obviously answered saying that, it's the most important thing possible, because as long as they are open-minded, I guess, and,
Right.
able to work together and scale, and they have that transparency. So even if they pivoted once or twice, eventually they'll come onto something.
Correct.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So you're part of the startup in Fundamentum. So what is your role at Fundamentum, and what startups do you look for to invest in?
So at Fundamentum, I'm a strategic advisor. So I am the head of HR at Bigbasket. So at Fundamentum, I play the role of a strategic advisor, which is, before investing in a startup, a potential investee company, to take a look at whether this company is capable of scaling up. Do the founders have it in them to learn along the way? Will they be willing to be coached? Are they open to coaching? Are they committed to building an institution? Are they committed to hiring competent people who are more competent than them, and building very, very capable leadership? So those are some of the things that I would look at. Are they structured correctly? Are they, from a strategic perspective, are they looking at structure? Do they understand different functions? Do they understand the interplay between different functions? So those are some of the things that I would look at, and advise Fundamentum in terms of making the investment. So, and I think post-investment, it would be really about working with some of them, to help them scale without the wheels coming off, to help them, avoid making some of those common mistakes, take the right decisions at the right time. So that's how I'm really involved with Fundamentum.
Wow. Nice. And then for your personal OC stage, what type of startups do you look for there?
Sorry, I didn't get your question. My personal?
For your personal funding, your personal investments that you make at C stage, what type of startups do you look for?
So those clearly, I look for the founder, nothing else. I need to know the founder well. I need to believe that this founder executes well. I should know the founder personally, and the fact that this individual is really committed to, integrity, transparency in the way business is run. And that's precisely it. I really don't care much for the idea. Broadly, the idea should appeal to me, and I would place my bets on the individual, the founder.
Right. So let's start into a list of a few questions. Actually, before we go into that, you have a new book coming out in September, Cutting the Gordian Knot. Correct?
Yes.
What is that book about?
So this book is really about India's quest for prosperity. So India has been pretty much an underdeveloped nation. So I think in the last 20 years, we have all begun to see signs of prosperity. At least a very small segment of India have been able to enjoy global standards of living. And I think this has created a lot of aspiration. At the same time, we all recognize that 12 million people, Indian youth, are entering employable age every year. And we are finding it increasingly difficult to find meaningful jobs for these 12 million youth. And if we handle this well, I would say it is demographic dividend. If we are not able to handle the different pieces of this puzzle, then we are in for some serious trouble. So my sense is that, the problem is pretty complex, which is poor nation's quest for prosperity. There are multiple pieces of this puzzle, which is about how do we move away from traditional education, which has no relationship for either employment or employability, to a skill-based kind of an education, practical education. How do we look at the farm sector? How do we handle the migration from the rural to the urban India? And how do we relook at higher education? How do we look at solving complex problems? Because complex problems need collaboration between different agencies, the government, the non-government, the for-profit, the non-for-profit, corporates. Everybody needs to come together to be able to solve these complex problems. So how do you solve these complex problems? How do you spark or ignite a movement of mass entrepreneurship? So those are some of the topics that we've touched upon. And in some ways, we are hoping that every Indian reads this book. And we are hoping that it will, to some extent, also help in driving some change. It's not that these problems have easy answers, but I think we've taken slightly different perspectives and tried to bring about a balanced view in terms of how the nation should go forward.
It sounds phenomenal. I love to read it. I can't wait to read it, actually. It seems like you're looking at it from a startup perspective too, and how to actually fix issues. So the question is, let's take, for example, there's 12 million people entering employment every single year. So what challenge, it's obviously a lot of challenges, but what steps would you take, you think you should take in order to fix it?
There are many steps, Ephraim. So let me just give you one or two examples that will illustrate the point. So for example, in India, you go to every village, in every hospital, we are short of doctors. No hospital has the required number of doctors. People in villages are suffering just because there are no doctors in hospitals. And why are there no doctors in hospitals? Because we don't have sufficient number of doctors for the required population. And why aren't there sufficient number of doctors? Because a medical program, takes almost 10 years to complete. So India does not need doctors who studied medicine for 10 years, because this entire education of medicine is really based on, dealing with every probable or possible situation. What if this happens? But the point is that most medical care does not require this, this kind of knowledge. Most doctors who studied medicine have told me that, that less than 5% of what they study is actually used by them. So I think we need to change education a little bit. So for example, if you want to test someone's eyes, whether the eyes are good enough or not, what power glasses to prescribe, you don't need somebody who's done 10 years to study ophthalmology super specialization. You just need somebody who knows how to use that instrument basically and can prescribe glasses. So we just need to move away from this, kind of education. But there's a very strong lobby that's going to obviously block this. But we need to just go away from this. For example, we have someone called a doctor assistant in a hospital. This person just does a 3-year program and assists doctors. But in many situations, even specialists like cardiac surgeons consult this doctor assistant to figure out whether to do an open heart surgery or to put a stent. So even a specialized doctor would consult this assistant, because this assistant who experience has picked up a lot of knowledge. So I think we just need to move away from this kind of an education to highly practical education. That's something we just need to do. For example, that's one simple example I'm giving you. So there are many, many such examples that will help us get these 12 million people employed. We need to emphasize a lot on developing skills. So for example, plumbing skills, carpentry skills. So I think a lot of this, interestingly, is pushed by technology. So something that we believe that companies like Amazon, Google are tech behemoths, pretty much monopolies in whatever they're doing. But in very unintended and unforeseen ways, they have been able to empower millions of people. Let me just give you an example, right? There are millions of people who sell on Amazon. Who are these people? They're all micro entrepreneurs. In an earlier world, they just didn't know how to reach their audience. So Amazon has provided them discoverability. So a supplier, an artisan who produces an exotic art product in one part of India is able to find a buyer in a completely different part of India. This would just not have been possible without companies like Amazon or Flipkart. You have another company, for example, called Urban Clap. They have brought, providers of service and customers on the same platform. So for example, you will find plumbers, you will find carpenters, you will find beauticians. So if you want a service from a plumber, all you need to go is to the platform and pick a plumber. And every plumber at the end of a service is rated by a customer. So you know who is a good plumber, which you never knew in the past. So these technology platforms have created amazing wonders. So in terms of, creating employment, creating, a pull for skills, people have voluntarily figured out that they need to upskill if they need to get business. Before this, they didn't care, because customers never could figure out who is a skilled plumber. They couldn't even discover plumbers. So I think in many ways, technology is also, playing a role in terms of driving employment. Ola, for example, right? Ola, Uber, creating micro entrepreneurs. Millions of drivers are driving for these two car aggregators. People are coming in from rural areas, signing up for driving tests, driving in driving schools, paying money voluntarily, because at the end of it, there is a job for them. So these companies have, created micro entrepreneurs on a large scale. So technology has also helped.
Wow. It does. So, wow, there's a lot to talk about over there. So I'm just going to touch on 2 points. So the first thing you mentioned, technology always helps. The biggest thing now is that people are very afraid of AI, thinking that machine learning AI, that it's going to take away jobs. People don't realize that it's not going to take away jobs. It's going to upscale our sense that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
correct. True.
It's a big thing. And the second thing you mentioned over there is that the education. And this is something also I'm very passionate about. In the sense that education has to be transformed and trained, transformed and changed. In the sense that education right now is all about repetition and memorization.
Right.
And in essence, we should be transforming to a vocational type of education in the sense of learning a practical skill for people that are not going to be entrepreneurial and do something and start something on their own. They have to be taught a practical skill. So like you mentioned, plumbing or any other type, or even becoming an engineer or a technician or, coding or something. People have to be taught something more in a sense of go in a vocational type of way and learn a set skill if they're not going to go the entrepreneurial route. And what happens is that, which is because the way we're educated in the sense of just constantly memorizing and repeating things,
right?
When a person comes, for example, in India, 12 million people comes at, they reach their finish university or whatever it is at 21, 22, and they're starting to figure out, what should I do with my life now? Because most people are not going to end up using their degree. It's an issue. So we have to change it. But
correct.
I have no doubt in my mind when this book comes out and with you leading the movement, there's going to be a major transformation over there, and 12 million people will be hired every single year.
Thank you. Thanks, Ephraim, for the trust.
Not even a question. So let's go into a bunch of questions here. Who's your favorite Indian entrepreneur?
That's a difficult question, Ephraim, because I've liked several entrepreneurs. So it's a bit unfair for me to pick one or two.
Well, if I ask in general, people go, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. Let's go specific in India. So who do we got? Who are the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musk of India?
So in some ways, I would say the founders of Flipkart. The founders of Flipkart are Sachin Bansal and Binny Bansal. They are the poster boys of the Indian startup ecosystem. So they would be pretty much the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musk.
Wow. And they started this whole movement, and this whole movement is just going, it's just transforming. So where do you see the startup culture in India going the next 5-10 years?
So my sense is that the startup culture is maturing. And let me ask this question. What is the sign of maturity? The sign of maturity is when it becomes a mass movement, when a lot of people, try solving problems, take a shot at entrepreneurship, irrespective of whether it succeeds or not, and try solving problems genuinely. I think that's when entrepreneurship would come of age. I can see that clearly happening in India. I visit several educational institutions, meet up with students. Every one of them is fascinated with entrepreneurship. Every one of them wants to do something. Every one of them, even before they complete college, want to get associated with an idea. So I see this happening on a large scale. So let me just give an example. So there is this, AI startup in Bangalore by name Live.ai. So these are a bunch of entrepreneurs who are solving problems, doing things that even companies like Google and Amazon have not been successful at. So what they've been able to do is they have been able to convert voice to text in 9 Indian languages.
Wow.
So India is a big market, but it's also a fragmented market. So, India has about 15 official languages, and each of them is, has a large number of speakers. So it's important to cater to that market. So this firm is doing that pretty much, is able to, translate, is able to convert voice to text, and do a lot more. So I think Indians are trying to solve problems on the ground. They're trying to spot where is the problem, where is an opportunity, and can I go and fix that. So I know of a startup by name Dunzo, very, very young, bright, dynamic, inspirational entrepreneur. My name, his name is Kabir. And what he's doing is, providing hyper local services, which is that they'll do anything for you. For example, if you've forgotten your laptop in your friend's place, they'll pick it up for you and bring it to your place. If you want to get some equipment repaired, they'll go get it done for you. If you want someone to pick up grocery for you, they'll do that for you. So, that's a very small idea, which is they picked up an urban problem, which is that traffic is very heavy. People always need that little help. And can I be your, permanent concierge? Can I be there to offer you any help that you want? Can I do anything for you? In the middle of the night, you need some medicine. I'll go to a medical shop and pick it up for you. So that's, a service. They've just figured out that there is a need, and he's working hard to build an organization around it. And there are VCs who are funding this big time. So there is just one idea, and there are several such ideas. So I think this is the best time in India to be an entrepreneur. If you had to be an entrepreneur, this is the time.
I think I'm just going to move to India. That's it. Yeah, I know now, if I don't keep on topic for our, discussion, we're going to definitely talk for another few hours about everything you just mentioned now. But we have to keep on topic and respect your time. So what do you recommend the books you think that every entrepreneur should read?
I don't know really. So a couple, for example, I liked a book called The Hard Things About Hard Things. I've written a book on startups along with Shraddha Sharma. She's the founder and CEO of a media company called Your Story. In fact, I talked to you about her some time back, which is 10 years back. She quit CNBC television to start this up. Nobody believed that what she's doing would be helpful. But I think she created a movement, which is she encouraged entrepreneurs. She encouraged struggling entrepreneurs, was always there for them, told them your story, their story. Her mission has been, everyone has a story. Tell me, I will tell it to the rest of the world. So I teamed up with her, and two of us wrote this book called Cut the Crap and Jargon, Learnings from the Startup Trenches. I think we've done a very good job of this. I'm not trying to brag, but I genuinely feel that we picked up lessons from the trenches, lessons that no textbook will tell you.
I'm going to buy it right after this. I'm going to buy it and read it. Sure, continue. So you picked up lessons you picked up.
Sorry?
So I'm sorry for cutting you off, but you're saying that the lessons that you learned over there are lessons, that actual practical lessons that you can implement.
Yes, absolutely. Practical lessons that we experience them time and again. So everything that we've said in the book carries a lot of conviction because we've experienced that all.
Wow. So that cut the crap. I like that. That's a
Cut
great
the crap and jargon, lessons from the startup trenches.
Is it on Amazon?
Yes, absolutely. It's on Amazon.
Oh, perfect. I'm going to buy right afterwards. Read it. So,
Penguin.
Sure. What is the best advice you have ever received that has helped you throughout your career?
Best advice, that's tough to say, but I would say that when you listen with empathy. I think that was some good advice. And the other advice was that many times you will work with people who are different from you. Learn to, leverage that diversity, celebrate the diversity. Don't try to force your opinions. Don't try to expect the other person to be like you. Just see how you can work well as a team by celebrating one another's diversity. I think those were a couple of lessons that I think are very priceless for me.
Incredible. So let me ask you like this. So besides obviously changing, India in the sense of, fixing the education problem, fixing the job market problem, fixing, taking care of the HR of India in general and the Bigbasket and every other company you're involved with, what else would you say adds meaning into your life?
That's an interesting question, Ephraim. Very philosophical one as well. On days when everything goes well and I'm happy, I feel I have found meaning in life. When my daughter smiles and snuggles up to me and gives me a big hug, I feel I found meaning in life. But very soon I realized that life may have no meaning at all. It's just an accident and you just need to live it. So I keep oscillating between two extremes when I feel that there is meaning to life, and between, the other extreme is, that life really is an accident. You just need to live it. There's no need to search for that meaning. So I keep oscillating between those two positions, frankly. I still have not been able to find the true meaning.
So you're on a quest for the answer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll leave it at that for now. Wow. So Harry, this has been absolutely phenomenal. Amazing.
Thank you.
I've learned a tremendous amount. And I know, for example, that there's so much that when I start my next startup, I'm definitely going to have you on board. You know, I'm going to steal you from Bigbasket to be the HR by me, you know. Thank you so much for everything you shared, your wisdom. Oh, beforehand, if an entrepreneur wanted to contact you, either for your advice, investment, they want to send you a proposal, a pitch deck, anything, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Ephraim. That's the best way.
Perfect. We'll put your LinkedIn. That's where it is. Okay. And you actually have a great post today about LinkedIn, which actually generated a tremendous amount of comments. I'm still working through all of them. I think it's holding around like 60, 70 comments already by now. And it's a phenomenal post. And I think recommend everyone should go read it. But either way, thank you so much. You have a tremendous amount of wisdom and things that I've learned. And I think we just started. This is just the opening of the floodgates to a bigger conversation that we're going to have going forward. And if there's anything I can do to help in any way, please reach out. And, you know, obviously when you come to the United States, when you come to New York City, you have a place to stay. I'll take care of you, show you around. It's an open invitation. And thank you, really, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everything else.
Thank you very much, Ephraim, for having me. And likewise, when you visit India, visit Bangalore, you have a home.
I'm coming shortly. You convinced me to move there almost, you know? Thank you so much, Harry.
Thank you very much, Ephraim. Thanks. Take care. Bye.